Rose Chase was different.
She's pretty much always been an outcast.
But so was her husband, Adam.
They're into the sci-fi type stuff, and they just kind of clicked.
They were very happy together.
But then, after 11 years of marriage, Rose's husband vanished.
She just said he walked out, left his cell phone, his car, everything.
Was it simply a spat?
He went to blow off some steam somewhere.
Or was something else going on?
Call it a mother's intuition.
We weren't going to find him alive.
The search would reveal the truth about their marriage.
They were kissing and touching in a way that she shouldn't be doing.
Expose a shocking secret.
She always said, I couldn't think she's mine.
And end with a monstrous revelation.
Head, arms, legs, came off no problem.
June 14th, 2012. It was around 6 p.m. when 31-year-old Rose Chase pulled up outside her mother-in-law's house in Stanley, New York, a tiny village in the Finger Lakes region.
Our area is very rural. It's just a very quiet country little town.
Rose had arrived to pick up her young son. She and the boy's father, 31-year-old Adam Chase, had been married 11 years and had been together since high school.
I remembered them first starting dating like maybe towards the end of his senior year.
Which made what Rose told her mother-in-law, Sylvia, that much more shocking. Not only had the couple had a violent argument.
Adam supposedly punched a hole in the wall.
Rose said that Adam had stormed out of the house.
Walked out, left his cell phone, his car, everything at home. He didn't take nothing with him.
And according to Rose, he had been gone almost 7 hours.
He said he was walking, and he left the house around 11 o'clock that day.
My mom would ask her, why didn't you call me? We're close. I could have came in and talked to him.
Rose said she hadn't thought there was any need at first. Rose told Sylvia that she assumed Adam was just going for a walk to calm down and clear his head.
She said, I figured he'd be home by now.
But after 7 hours with no word from Adam and no way to reach him, the entire family started to worry. Storming off without his phone just wasn't like Adam.
He was always on that thing. You could always get a hold of him no matter what. So him not taking his cell phone was just really bizarre to hear.
Sylvia promised to call as soon as she heard anything. And when Rose left with her son, she said she would do the same. But that night, as she watched Rose drive away, Sylvia had no idea just how many dark and disturbing secrets the search for her son would eventually reveal about her daughter-in-law. Born in 1981 and raised in upstate New York, Rose Mooney had a difficult childhood.
She's pretty much always been an outcast.
She had dyslexia, so some of the kids kind of made fun of her when she went to special classes.
Taunted by the other children, Rose became shy and withdrawn, preferring to spend time with her pets rather than kids her own age.
She was thinking about being a veterinarian.
And when Rose's family moved to the remote rural community of Stanley when she was in the 7th grade, she became even more isolated.
She had her animals and mostly kept to herself. She felt like the girl that sat on the sidelines.
But that was about to change, thanks to a boy named Adam Chase. 1 year older than Rose, Adam was a popular kid at her school.
Adam was cute. He was handsome.
He was really tall, he was a big guy.
But he was easygoing and approachable.
He was a big teddy bear. He always reached out to people. He could make you feel comfortable within 5 minutes of knowing you.
Partly because for all his popularity, he had quite a few quirks of his own.
Adam liked swords, Renaissance stuff.
He loved computer games, a complete computer geek.
And when he first met Rose, he realized that they shared a kindred spirit.
They're into the sci-fi type stuff, and they just had that in common, so they just kind of clicked.
Although at first, their relationship wasn't romantic.
They used to go to like Renaissance festivals and dress up.
They kind of went together as friends.
And with Adam to guide her, the shy girl who sat on the sidelines soon learned to embrace and even celebrate the fact that she wasn't like all the other kids.
She always had the crazy hairdos,
We never knew what she was gonna wear, so
makeup or clothing, and she just always made herself stand out.
No one noticed more than Adam. After being friends for several years, he and Rose became a couple.
in high school, they really started dating.
It had been a long time coming, but it appeared to have been worth the wait.
They seemed like they were very happy together.
They wouldn't be high school sweethearts for long, though. Adam dropped out at the start of his senior year.
Because he missed some gym classes and he wasn't making them up. So he quit. He went and got his GED.
Rose, who still struggled with her dyslexia, strongly considered following her boyfriend's example.
She was a whiz in math and science. When it came to English and social studies, she fell behind with the kids.
And according to Rose's mother, Adam encouraged her to drop out, but she wouldn't have it.
Adam wanted her to move in, and I go, when she graduates from school, I don't care what you guys do, but she's going to graduate.
Just as her mother promised, Rose did graduate from high school. But she never pursued her childhood dream of being a veterinarian. Instead, she took an assembly job at a local factory.
She worked all the time, a lot of overtime.
Adam, on the other hand, had a hard time holding down a steady job.
He kind of moved a lot. He was in business mostly. He would sell windows. I think at one point he sold cars.
They weren't making a lot of money, but they had each other. And in June of 2001, when Rose was 19 and Adam had just turned 20, the couple married in true Renaissance fair fashion.
Rose had not your typical wedding dress that you would see these days. It was kind of old-fashioned with some sort of veil that was like a hat, and it was different.
After the wedding, the couple lived temporarily with Adam's parents.
She was just like family.
I treated her just like a sister.
My parents looked at her like a daughter. I mean, she called them mom and dad.
And thanks to the money Rose and Adam saved by living with mom and dad, the couple soon had enough to buy a place of their own in the neighboring town of Bristol.
It's just the next town over. They did live in Bristol for quite a while.
It was just a trailer, and it was only supposed to be temporary. Rose and Adam planned to start a family, but after several frustrating and fruitless years, their doctors delivered some devastating news.
Adam was told that he had trouble.
It was correctable if they could afford it.
It would cost $10,000, and their insurance did not cover it.
Unable to afford the procedure, Rose and Adam soldiered on, hoping for a miracle. And it looked as if their prayers had finally been answered when 6 years into their marriage, Rose gave birth to a son. And it was tough to say who was happier, Rose or Adam.
He loved being a dad. He would do anything for that little boy.
In fact, once the baby came along, Adam quit his job and became a full-time dad.
Adam was Mr. Mom. He took care of this little boy.
And for the next several years, Rose continued to work.
She was the breadwinner, going out and making sure the family was stable.
And Adam focused on raising their son.
It was Adam giving him breakfast and, getting him dressed and all that.
The couple's arrangement appeared to work. Adam bonded with the little boy, who even as a toddler showed a precocious talent for electronics.
Anything on the computer he knew how to do from Adam.
Or he can type it in. Oh, yeah. Very computer oriented.
Rose, meanwhile, got promoted at work.
The supervisor described her as being very responsible and very dependable.
In fact, after 12 years together, the couple was doing so well that in 2011 they sold their place in Bristol and bought a bigger house on the outskirts of Stanley.
Adam wanted to move closer to home.
We've always been a very close-knit family.
Moving closer to home wasn't the only big change the couple made, however. With their little boy scheduled to start kindergarten in the fall of 2012, Adam began looking for work. And by May, he'd even managed to line up something.
He was being a debt collector for student loans.
A new home, a new job, and their son about to start school. Everything appeared to be going well for Rose and Adam. But less than a month later, Rose would walk into her mother-in-law's house and announce that her husband had vanished. By the afternoon of June 15, 2012, it had been almost 24 hours since 30-year-old Rose Chase had walked into her mother-in-law's house in Stanley, New York, and reported that her husband, Adam, had mysteriously disappeared.
She walked in and said, "Oh, and by the way, Adam walked away this morning about 11 o'clock. Him and I had a fight."
Sounded as though he got mad at his wife and went to blow off some steam somewhere.
But when Sylvia Chase spoke to her on the morning of the 15th, Rose said that Adam still hadn't come home or called.
I called her. I said, "Have you heard anything from Adam?" "No, I haven't."
Even more troubling, Sylvia hadn't heard anything from Adam either.
She thought something was wrong because she hadn't been hearing from him. They spoke pretty much every day.
Worried about her son, Sylvia decided to contact the authorities.
She had contacted a sheriff's deputy that was a school resource officer at the school where she works.
I said, "What should I do about this?" He goes, "Let's file him missing." I said, "Okay."
Once the missing persons report was filed, the investigators contacted the last person who'd seen Adam, his wife.
They thought that maybe she just said something to him, which made him so mad that he left.
According to Rose, that was more or less exactly what happened. But she also said that was hardly the couple's first heated argument. Rose told the investigators that their troubles had started soon after Adam quit his job to become a stay-at-home dad. Although according to Rose, he spent more time playing video games on his computer than he did with their child.
It was a virtual video game that he played with other people online. They would go until way early in the morning.
He would sit 4 hours to the point that he wouldn't get up to go to the bathroom. He would urinate in cans and bottles instead.
Rose told the investigators that she had started to feel neglected.
She didn't feel as though she got enough attention from her husband, that he paid more attention to video games.
According to Rose, Adam wasn't just neglecting her, he was neglecting his babysitting duties too. She told the investigators that while she was at work, Adam would sleep in, exhausted from a late night of gaming, and leave their little boy to fend for himself.
There's been times that Adam left him in the same diaper all night.
Rose even claimed that when the child was 3, Adam had let the little boy wander out of the house, naked and alone.
He must have wet himself, or he stripped himself down naked. Couldn't find Mom in the house, couldn't get Dad up. Got outside, got onto the street, and started walking down the street where a couple found him.
Their little boy wasn't hurt, but according to Rose, the incident did lead to an increasing number of arguments with Adam, especially whenever she suggested he seek help for what she described as his video game addiction.
Adam's temper sometimes got the best of him.
Rose admitted that she had gotten angry too. In fact, she told the investigators that things got so heated between her and Adam that they had even discussed getting a divorce.
Rose had enough.
Although according to Rose, she had tried to work things out for the sake of their little boy.
Rose asked to go to some counseling and see if it was worth saving their marriage.
Rose said that Adam had refused to seek counseling, but she did say that he had taken June 14th off from work, and they sent their son to spend the night at her in-laws so she and Adam could spend the day together and hopefully sort things out.
Rose and Adam that day had agreed to talk about their problems.
But according to Rose, when she tried to talk to her husband, he ignored her.
Adam continued to play on the computer, which angered Rose.
Tempers flared and voices were raised.
They had a fight.
And at some point during the shouting match, Rose said that things took a sudden turn toward violence.
She said, "My son punched the wall."
But that was as far as it went, according to Rose. Because then, perhaps afraid he would do something he'd regret, Rose said Adam had stormed out of the house.
Adam had walked away, and he hadn't taken his phone or his car keys or his wallet.
And by the time Rose finished talking to the investigators, he had been missing for more than 24 hours.
She didn't know where he went.
With no solid leads, the investigators spent the next few days scouring the surrounding countryside.
They searched places they knew he liked to hike,
Searches in the woods and the trails.
canvassing hotels, looking for, basically for where Adam might have been.
But all the searches turned up empty. And by the end of the week, with still no word from Adam, his family was beginning to fear the worst.
Colored the mother's intuition, but I knew something was wrong because Adam would have called me.
Adam's mother wasn't the only one beginning to suspect something had gone horribly wrong either. On June 18th, after Adam had been missing 4 days, sheriff's deputies showed up at Rose's house with a cadaver dog.
They asked if they could bring the dog inside.
Rose let the deputies inside, although she did apologize for the state the house was in.
The house was really messy, smelly, cluttered.
And the only evidence the investigators found upstairs appeared to confirm Rose's account of her altercation with Adam.
There was a hole that had been patched in the wall.
But then, when the deputies asked to look in the basement, Rose did hesitate.
She told them that there was water down there, the sump pump had broke.
Was Rose hiding something? When the deputies opened the door at the head of the basement stairs, that was definitely what it looked like, or at least smelled like.
They did at that time find a very strong odor in the basement.
You know, you could smell like something was dead in the basement.
But when the investigators got to the bottom of the stairs, it appeared that Rose had been telling the truth. The basement was damp and full of soggy trash.
Pieces of furniture, cleaning supplies, dead rats.
And when the deputies brought the cadaver dog down, it gave no indication that a human body had ever been there.
They searched the house and came out and said there's nothing there.
Their suspicions of Rose apparently baseless. The investigators were back to square one. But their findings did provide a little comfort to his family.
In the back of my mind, I was just had that little bit of hope, hoping that Adam just needed time.
And no one appeared more hopeful than Rose.
She would go to the police periodically for updates. She would call
to see if they knew anything, if they were getting close.
Unfortunately, The investigators had little else to tell her. By November, Adam had been missing for 5 months, and the authorities were no closer to finding him.
They were stuck.
The authorities essentially admitted as much on November 14, 2012. That's when they held a joint press conference alongside Rose and Adam's family.
They came out and pleaded for the public's help, in helping locate Adam.
They also called on Adam to come forward.
They talked a little bit about if he didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be found.
And then, while Rose looked on, her mother-in-law made her own desperate plea to her son.
Adam, if you're out there, please come home.
On November 15, 2012, a small crowd of newspaper and TV reporters gathered outside a modest home in the tiny upstate New York town of Stanley. 24 hours after the Ontario County Sheriff's Department held a press conference about Adam Chase, who'd been missing for more than 5 months, his family had called a press conference of their own.
I instantly sent a letter out to every media source that I knew, and we held our own press conference the next day.
And the press conference focused on one thing: the way the authorities were handling Adam's disappearance.
They were just treating it as a missing persons.
Assuming that Adam had simply walked out on his wife and little boy, the authorities had ruled out foul play. In fact, when they searched the couple's home after Adam's disappearance, they hadn't found any evidence of foul play either.
They did search the Chase family house on the 18th, including the basement. They did not find anything.
But as the family told the assembled reporters, they were far less convinced than the investigators.
Adam never would have done this to his family.
His son's birthday, the first day of kindergarten, all those firsts, he wouldn't have missed those.
In fact, as far as the family was concerned, Adam's 5-month absence could only mean one thing.
We weren't going to find him alive.
And they believed the person behind it was the same person they'd made a point not to invite to their press conference: Adam's wife, Rose.
Rose did something to him.
Adam's family claimed that their suspicions were based on more than just his mother's intuition, too.
They had a bit of a troubled marriage.
Rose had admitted as much to the investigators. But from there, her account and his family's version differed dramatically. For starters, the family strongly disagreed with Rose's claims that Adam shirked his duties as a stay-at-home dad.
I do not believe a single word that she says about my brother's character.
Instead, they had plenty to say about Rose's character.
I had heard back in 2007 that Rose was having an affair.
And according to the family, that wasn't the only one.
They spoke of Rose having multiple affairs over the years.
But the family said that whenever they had shared their suspicions with Adam, he had always refused to believe them.
He sided with Rose and said that it couldn't happen. He didn't believe that Rose would do anything like that to him.
But then, in June of 2012, the family finally got what they believed to be proof. A family friend had just happened to be strolling through the park in a neighboring town when she spotted Rose cuddling up to someone on a park bench.
She had to take a double take because it wasn't Adam sitting next to Rose.
They were kissing and touching in a way that she shouldn't be doing with somebody who wasn't her husband.
Concerned, the friend had contacted Adam's sister, Jessica, and forwarded a picture she had discreetly taken with her phone. Jessica told her mother, and within days, they'd filled Adam in on the situation.
He didn't believe it at first until my parents sent the picture.
Finally confronted with evidence of his wife's alleged infidelity, Adam realized he had to act according to his family.
He goes, well, I'll talk about it with her.
Whether he did or not, the family didn't know for sure. But within days of his wife being spotted in a park kissing another man, Adam Chase had vanished. But when the family shared their suspicions with the sheriff's department, they said their concerns were dismissed.
The sheriff's department told us it's not an episode of Law and Order and that we needed to stop thinking the worst.
I said, well, have you talked to Rose? Has anybody interviewed her? Do a lie detector test. She hasn't given us any reason for it. She's been very cooperative.
He pulled me aside and said that, you need to let this go. Rose didn't do anything wrong.
The Chases weren't about to give up, however. In the weeks following their press conference, they decided to put pressure on Rose.
We held rallies outside her house. We had signs like missing posters, missing Adam, that kind of stuff.
And the result was an all-out war between Rose and her in-laws.
She called the sheriff's department. She had said that we were harassing her.
She said, I always thought the Chases were a nice family, but now they're all psychos.
And the local authorities warned the family to back off or face arrest.
The investigators actually called us crazy.
However, at least one person in town sided with the Chase family, a local private investigator named Rodney Miller.
He's a very good friend of the family.
He agreed very quickly with them that something seemed wrong.
Unfortunately, even if Rose had been unfaithful, they still had no proof that she had anything to do with Adam's disappearance.
We had our gut and what our heart told us, and to me that was good enough.
Their gut feeling wouldn't hold up in a court of law, however. So on December 13th, 2012, the private investigator approached the local woman who babysat for Rose.
He called me that morning, and he said, will you play a game with me?
And the purpose of the game was to scare Rose into doing something rash. Perhaps even get her to admit that Adam was dead.
I said, I want you to tell her that you heard somebody's going to be charged with murder.
The babysitter, who shared the family's suspicions about Rose, agreed to help.
We all thought that she was behind it in some way.
So when Rose arrived to pick up her son that afternoon, Sandra played her part to the hilt.
She usually always picked him up between 5:10 and 5:15. It was 5:19 when she walked in the door, and she says to me, oh, you probably think I forgot to pick up my son. And I looked at her and I said, no. I figured you were probably on the phone with the investigators.
And when Rose asked why,
I said, because there's been a huge break in Adam's case. She goes, oh my God, her face just went white.
No, she just says, oh, I gotta get home. Oh, I gotta get home.
And then when Rose rushed out with her son, Sandra called Rodney.
I said, get over to Rose's house now. I said, she is unraveling.
All she needed was a nudge, which Rodney was happy to provide just as soon as he reached Rose's house.
She comes out of the house, and I walked up and I said, I think I have enough to get an indictment against you and charge you with the murder of your husband.
He told Rose, hey, the jig's up. It's over.
It wasn't true, but Rose didn't know that.
She just plopped onto the top step and put her head down in her hands and started rocking back and forth.
Sensing that Rose was about to break, Rodney urged her to come clean.
I said, I want to know where you buried him.
Rose's response wasn't quite what the investigator expected, though.
She popped her head up out of her hands and she said, I didn't bury him. I burned him.
Stunned by Rose's reply, Rodney immediately contacted the authorities and Adam's family.
Rodney calls and he goes, I found Adam.
He didn't give Adam's mother the details, though.
She wanted to know where, and I told her to come to their residence. I didn't want to tell her over the phone what I knew.
Sylvia and her daughters rushed right over, arriving even before the authorities. And that's when Rodney Miller finally told them the awful truth. At first, Adam's mother was dismayed by the news.
I couldn't believe it.
But when the full implications of what Rose had done finally sank in, Sylvia turned on her in a rage.
She turned around and screamed at her, you burned my son, you bitch.
How could somebody be this callous and this monstrous to another human being?
According to Adam's family, Rose showed the same callous disregard for them.
She sat on the porch and just looked at us.
No emotion whatsoever.
She didn't break down and cry or show any remorse.
And once sheriff's deputies arrived on the scene and took Rose into custody, she just as calmly directed them to her mother's house. According to Rose, that was where they would find Adam's remains.
They immediately went to the mother's property down in Yates County.
When the sheriff's deputies knocked on the door and asked for permission to search the property, Rose's mother was confused.
I asked, what are we looking for? He goes, the body of Adam is here on your property.
Rose's mother said she figured it was all some sort of dreadful mistake. But then her daughter stepped out of the squad car, led the deputies to a burn pile in the back of the house, and indicated that somewhere in the pile was all that remained of her husband.
They could see all sorts of things, a lot of ash, including some what appeared to be human bone.
And that was when Rose's calm demeanor finally collapsed.
She's crying. She's going, I'm sorry. I didn't really want this to end up like this. I am so sorry.
It looked like she might have been relieved, that she was finally getting this off her chest.
On October 8, 2013, Rose Chase stood trial in Ontario County, New York. The 32-year-old was charged with the murder of her husband, Adam, who had mysteriously disappeared in June of 2012.
Rose reported him missing, that they got into some type of an argument one morning, and he packed up and left and didn't come back.
But in December of 2012, after a private investigator hired by Adam's family convinced her she was about to be arrested for his murder, Rose not only admitted that Adam was dead, she had led the authorities to his cremated remains, scattered in a burn pile behind her mother's house.
They sifted through all that ash and other rubble that was there and collected as many bone fragments as they could.
In their opening statement that morning, the prosecution claimed that Rose had killed Adam in order to get out of an increasingly loveless marriage.
Rose was unhappy in the marriage and cheated on her husband multiple times.
And since being the family's breadwinner and having allegedly been unfaithful would most likely leave her paying alimony to Adam, the prosecution claimed that Rose hadn't considered divorce an option.
She didn't want to share any of the money that she had saved with her husband.
The prosecutors had what they considered to be powerful evidence against her, too. The videotaped confession made after Rose's arrest on December 13th, 2012.
The videotape was pretty significant in the trial, and they played the entire tape.
Although curiously, much of Rose's confession conformed to what she'd originally told the authorities after Adam had first disappeared. According to Rose, she had begun the day intending to save her marriage, not end it.
Him and I called into work so this way we could work things out.
But Rose claimed that their attempt to talk things over had quickly turned into an argument once Adam brought up the fact that someone had seen her in the park supposedly kissing another man.
I told him it's just me on the park bench talking.
According to Rose, her denials only made Adam angrier. So angry that he had even started questioning whether he was really the father of their son.
He always said, deep down in my heart, I love him down, but I don't think he's mine.
One way or another, he wanted to know for sure.
Adam wanted a DNA test.
Rose said that's when, in her anger, she had revealed a secret that she had kept hidden for years.
I told him then, no need.
She says he's not yours.
According to Rose, her husband hadn't taken the truth well.
He got furious, punched the wall.
Then Adam turned to storm away, much as she had originally claimed. But in the videotape, Rose added a new detail: the fact that she had tried to stop him.
I got him by his left arm. He takes a spray on, kind of gives me a little bit of a push.
And according to Rose, that was when everything had gone horribly wrong.
And that's when his right foot caught the edge of the stairs.
According to her confession, Adam's death had been an accident.
I know he tumbled, but I don't know how many times. He tumbled, hit his head on the door.
Was it true? Had Adam simply fallen down the stairs? The investigators were skeptical. On the tape, they asked Rose point blank, did Adam trip, or had he been pushed?
If it was the heat of the moment and you thought enough was enough and you pushed him, you pushed him. That's what it is.
Put on the spot by the investigators, Rose appeared to hesitate.
I don't know if I actually gave him that extra oomph.
She can try and pretend that it was an accident, but I know it was not an accident.
Did you plan on killing
Oh, hell no.
Intentionally or not, the result appeared to be the same. Rose said that when she rushed down to where Adam lay sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, he appeared to be dead.
He wasn't moving. He wasn't making any noise. He wasn't doing anything.
But if it had been an accident, why not call 911? Rose told the investigators that as she wondered what to do, she had come to a shocking realization.
I was better off than dead.
And if he did live, according to Rose, what she'd just told him about their son's paternity would give him excellent grounds for divorce.
I knew he'd get my 401k and everything.
In her dimension mind, it was easier just to get rid of him.
So rather than call the police, Rose said that she had heaved her husband down the second flight of stairs.
Basically to make sure that he was dead.
Slide down
I
the
just let
stairs.
gravity do
Yeah.
its work.
She'd let time do its work, too. Rose told the investigators that she had left Adam where he lay.
She stacked wood from the yard and other items on top of him.
Incredibly, according to Rose, he was still in the basement when the sheriff's department brought in cadaver dogs and searched the house.
After I hid the body, and the dogs came in, I thought I got pretty lucky.
They brought an outdoor cadaver dog. An outdoor cadaver dog is different than an indoor cadaver dog, and they're not trained the same. They have different expertise.
But with Adam's family increasingly suspicious and the smell in the basement getting worse, Rose said that she knew her luck wouldn't last. So in late July of 2012, after Adam had been in the basement for more than a month, she had decided to get rid of him once and for all.
Did you cut him up or anything? Did you need any tools or anything? Or Because if you did, where would those be?
He just fell apart.
She said I took him out piece by piece.
Head, arms, legs. Came off no problem.
It's shocking what she's saying, but then just how casual she goes about telling the details.
Including the detail that her 5-year-old son had been with her, strapped in his car seat when she drove over to her mother's with Adam's remains in the trunk of her car.
There was no one there to take care of the boy. She says, well, what the hell, I'll just take him along.
That video just kind of puts a nail in the coffin and shows just how awful she is and how callous of a person she is.
That's definitely what the prosecution figured. And when it was the defense's turn, they agreed that Rose's videotaped statement had been appalling. But they also argued that it wasn't a murder confession.
Rose's lawyers talked about how it was an accident, how Rose didn't mean for Adam to die. She didn't mean for him to fall down the stairs.
At least not when he'd gone down the first flight of stairs. But what about the second flight? According to the defense, that wasn't murder either.
Her defense basically argued he was dead after he went down that first flight of stairs. The second flight was intentional, but he was already dead, so that's not murder.
They were claiming you can't kill a dead person.
Rose wouldn't make that claim directly, though. Considering how damaging her videotaped statement had been, the defense decided not to put her on the stand.
I've spoken the truth, but my words have ultimately been turned around against me.
In fact, the defense didn't put anyone on the stand.
Rose's attorney did not call any witnesses.
Instead, before wrapping up their case, the defense requested and received an important concession from the judge. A jury instruction that just might allow Rose to dodge the murder charge.
The defense argued to have manslaughter put on the jury selection card so they could choose either murder 2, which is intentional, or manslaughter, which was accidental.
On October 18, 2013, at the Ontario County Courthouse in upstate New York, the jury announced it had just reached a verdict in Rose Chase's murder trial. Thanks to the persistence of the victim's family and their private investigator, the 32-year-old mother was accused of killing her husband, Adam, in June of 2012.
I don't doubt for a second that she, in some sort of way, planned it.
The defense, on the other hand, had argued that Rose was only guilty of hiding her husband's death, not causing it.
Their defense is that he accidentally fell down the stairs and then she panicked.
And the jury had just spent the past 7 hours trying to decide which side to believe.
The longer it took for the jury to come back with a verdict, the more nervous I got.
The whole situation was just stressful, not knowing what was going to happen.
In the end, all that stress and uncertainty came down to the crucial moment when the verdict was read.
She was found guilty of second-degree murder.
It was a hard-won victory for Adam's family.
I'm ecstatic that there was a guilty verdict.
I was terrified throughout the entire trial that she would get away with it.
But while Adam's mother was equally pleased that her daughter-in-law had been found guilty, she was less thrilled with Rose's sentence. 24 years to life in prison.
I wish we had the death penalty. I really do. Because I don't think she deserves to live.
A lot of people forgive at sentencing, but this family says they will never forgive her.
That's no surprise, according to Rose. She claims that the only reason she's in prison at all is because Adam's family was so determined to put her there.
My trial was nothing more than like a modern-day Salem witch trial. And they had a bed for me waiting in a prison before the verdict was in.
and she'll be there a long time, especially if Adam's family has any say in the matter.
She'll see me at every parole hearing for the rest of her life, fighting for my brother because she took away his voice, but she's not going to take away his memory.
Rose, on the other hand, maintains that no time in prison and no jury's verdict can take away what she believes to be true: her innocence.
I didn't do what everybody's claiming that I said I did.
There are certain criminal cases that shock a nation because of their brutality. Others become unforgettable because of the mystery surrounding them. But every so often, a case emerges that disturbs people for a different reason entirely. It forces them to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most horrifying secrets are hidden in the most ordinary places. In the city of Hamburg, Germany, during the late 20th century, there was nothing particularly remarkable about the home of a man named Lutz Reinstrom. To neighbors and acquaintances, he appeared to be a respectable citizen. He was married. He operated a fur business. Those who knew him described him as polite, friendly, and outwardly normal. There was little in his public behavior to suggest that he would one day become associated with one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in modern German history. Yet beneath that ordinary home, hidden from public view, existed a secret world. Behind reinforced barriers and concealed beneath the routines of everyday life was a bunker. It was not a storage room. It was not a workshop. According to investigators, it had been transformed into a place of captivity. A place where women could be isolated from the outside world. A place equipped with a steel door, a sound-insulated room, restraints, recording devices, and cameras. A place designed for control. For years, nobody outside that hidden space knew what was happening below ground. Friends, customers, and neighbors saw only the surface. They saw a businessman going about his daily routine. They saw an apparently stable family life. They saw a man who blended into the community around him. What they did not see were the crimes that prosecutors would later argue had been carefully concealed behind a facade of normality. The story that would eventually emerge was one of kidnapping, imprisonment, manipulation, violence, and murder. It was a story involving women who vanished and families left searching for answers. It was a story in which letters arrived, creating the illusion that loved ones had chosen to leave voluntarily. It was a story built upon deception. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case was not simply what happened to the victims. It was the length of time that the truth remained hidden. When people imagine violent crimes, they often picture chaos, sudden acts, and immediate discoveries. This case was different. Here, secrecy was one of the most powerful weapons. The victims were not merely attacked. According to the evidence later presented in court, they were held for days and, in one case, weeks. During that time, they were separated from everyone who cared about them. Their voices were controlled. Their movements were controlled. Even the messages sent to their families were controlled. While relatives searched for explanations, a false narrative was being carefully constructed. The women had supposedly left of their own accord. They had supposedly chosen a different life. They supposedly did not want to be found. Those claims were lies, but they were convincing enough to delay the realization that something far darker had occurred. The man at the center of this story would later become known throughout Germany by a chilling nickname, the Acid Killer. In German, the name was Surfassmörder, the Acid Barrel Killer. The nickname originated from one of the most disturbing elements of the investigation. Long after victims disappeared, investigators would uncover evidence that their remains had been placed in metal containers and exposed to hydrochloric acid in an attempt to destroy traces of the crimes. The image of those barrels would become inseparable from public memory of the case. Yet when investigators eventually reached that point, they did not begin with barrels. They did not begin with human remains, and they did not begin with murder charges. Instead, the chain of events that ultimately exposed the truth began with a woman who survived. In September 1991, a 53-year-old woman named Krista S. was abducted by Lutz Reinstrom. Like others before her, she was taken to the hidden bunker. Like others before her, she was restrained and held captive. During her imprisonment, she was shown photographs connected to previous victims. She was confronted with evidence intended to terrify her. Reinstrom demanded a ransom of 300,000 German marks. Everything suggested that another disappearance was unfolding. Another victim. Another secret. Another crime destined to remain hidden beneath layers of deception. But something unexpected happened. Reinstrom's carefully controlled plan was interrupted. His wife returned home earlier than anticipated. According to the investigation, he became concerned that his captive might be discovered. Faced with a situation he had not planned for, he made a decision that would alter the course of the entire case. Instead of killing Krista S., he released her near a police station on September 13, 1991. At the time, that decision may have seemed like a temporary solution to an immediate problem. In reality, it marked the beginning of his downfall. Krista survived. She was able to describe what had happened. She was able to tell investigators about the bunker. She was able to recount details that raised troubling questions. The more authorities examined those details, the more they sensed that this was not the work of a first-time offender. The facility itself suggested preparation. The methods suggested experience. The circumstances suggested history. Investigators began looking beyond the kidnapping case in front of them. They began asking whether there might have been victims who never escaped. Those questions eventually led to a deeper investigation. That investigation would uncover connections to earlier disappearances. It would lead police to search properties associated with Reinstrom. It would culminate in discoveries that shocked even experienced investigators. Hidden remains, metal containers, evidence of crimes that had remained concealed for years. As the pieces came together, a horrifying picture emerged. Two women, Hildegard K. and Annegret B., had disappeared years earlier. Both had been held captive. Both had been manipulated into sending messages that disguised the truth. Both would ultimately be found at the center of one of Germany's most notorious criminal cases. Yet this story is not merely about the crimes themselves. It is also about the unsettling contrast between appearance and reality. How does a person maintain a public image of normality while allegedly carrying out acts of extraordinary cruelty in secret? How can a hidden chamber exist beneath an ordinary home without attracting attention? How do families continue searching for answers while being unknowingly misled by messages written under coercion? And perhaps most importantly, how close did this case come to remaining unsolved forever? Had Krista S. not survived, would investigators have uncovered what happened to the women who disappeared years earlier? Would the bunker have remained hidden? Would the barrels ever have been found? Those questions continue to linger over the case decades later. Even after the trial, even after the conviction, and even after the discovery of physical evidence, there remained an enduring sense of unease. Some investigators reportedly wondered whether additional victims might exist. No evidence sufficient for further charges was ever established. But the very fact that such questions were asked illustrates how deeply this case affected those who worked on it. The crimes attributed to Lutz Reinstrom were shocking not only because of their brutality, but because they revealed a prolonged system of control operating beneath the surface of everyday life. Behind a respectable exterior stood a hidden bunker. Behind reassuring letters stood coercion. Behind unexplained disappearances stood violence. And behind years of unanswered questions stood a truth waiting to be uncovered. Before investigators discovered the bunker, before the barrels were excavated, and before a courtroom would hear the evidence, there were people whose lives were forever changed. There were families who searched for missing loved ones. There were victims whose stories deserved to be remembered not because of the man who harmed them, but because of the lives they lived before they became part of this case. To understand how this story unfolded, we must begin there with the victims, the background, and the seemingly ordinary world in which an extraordinary horror remained hidden for years. Before examining the crimes themselves, it is important to understand the world in which they occurred. True crime stories often become dominated by the actions of offenders, but doing so risks overshadowing the people whose lives were actually stolen or forever altered. In the case of Lutz Reinstrom, the contrast between the offender's outward appearance and the hidden reality of his actions became one of the most disturbing aspects of the investigation. To those around him, Reinstrom appeared ordinary. Born in 1941, he built a life that outwardly reflected stability and respectability. He operated a fur business. He was married. People who encountered him in daily life reportedly viewed him as polite and friendly. Nothing about his public image immediately suggested the crimes for which he would later be convicted. Cases involving hidden offenders often challenge assumptions about how dangerous individuals are expected to behave. Popular imagination frequently depicts violent criminals as visibly threatening, socially isolated, or incapable of functioning in ordinary society. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that reality is often far more complicated. In this case, the man eventually known as the Acid Barrel Killer maintained the appearance of a normal citizen for years. Customers interacted with him. Acquaintances spoke with him. Daily routines continued. Meanwhile, beneath his home in Hamburg, investigators would later discover a concealed environment that painted a radically different picture. According to case records, the underground bunker hidden beneath the residence was not an improvised space. Investigators found evidence suggesting careful preparation. The structure reportedly contained a reinforced steel door. There was a sound-insulated detention area. There were external locking mechanisms designed to control access. There was a location where victims could be restrained. There were recording devices. There were cameras. Each feature, viewed individually, might have appeared unusual. Taken together, they suggested a location specifically adapted for captivity and control. The existence of such a bunker became one of the defining elements of the case. It represented the physical separation between appearance and reality. Above ground existed the life that neighbors could see. Below ground existed a hidden environment concealed from public view. Later investigators would conclude that the bunker appeared too carefully organized to have been created spontaneously. Its existence suggested planning. It suggested preparation. It suggested that the crimes associated with it were not simply impulsive acts. Yet despite the disturbing nature of the bunker, it is essential to remember that buildings do not tell stories on their own. The true human tragedy of this case lies with the people who entered that hidden space and never returned. The first known victim was Hildegard K., a 61-year-old woman whose disappearance would remain unexplained for years. One of the most unsettling aspects of her case was the connection between victim and offender. Hildegard was not a random stranger selected without context. She was the wife of Reinstrom's former vocational instructor. This relationship mattered because it meant that Reinstrom possessed knowledge that an unknown offender might not have had. According to the available information, he knew details about her circumstances. He knew her background. He understood aspects of her daily life. In many criminal investigations, trust becomes an invisible weapon. Victims often lower their guard around people they recognize or individuals connected to familiar social circles. While the precise circumstances of the initial encounter have not been fully documented in publicly available records, investigators later concluded that Reinstrom targeted Hildegard and ultimately abducted her on March 12, 1986, long before she became a victim in a notorious criminal case. However, she was simply a woman living her life. Cases involving murder often reduce victims to names and dates. But every victim exists within a larger human story. There are families, relationships, routines, memories, and future plans. When a person disappears, those connections do not vanish. Instead, they become suspended in uncertainty. Loved ones wait for answers. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Questions accumulate. For Hildegard's family, that uncertainty would become compounded by deliberate deception. Yet before discussing that deception, another victim's story must be introduced. 2 years after Hildegard's disappearance, Reinstrom targeted a second woman. Annegret B. At 31 years old, she was considerably younger than the first victim, but her fate would become central to understanding the escalation of crimes. Investigators later described her case as the most brutal offense associated with Reinstrom. Like Hildegard, Annegret was more than a name in a court record. She was a person with family connections and a life that extended beyond the circumstances of her disappearance. When individuals vanish unexpectedly, families often find themselves trapped between hope and fear. Every unanswered phone call carries significance. Every rumor becomes a possibility. Every day without information becomes emotionally exhausting. The uncertainty surrounding missing person cases can be uniquely painful because there is no clear conclusion. Families may cling to the belief that their loved one will return even as time passes and evidence becomes increasingly scarce. In Annegret's case, that uncertainty was manipulated. Messages attributed to her would later contribute to the illusion that she remained alive and had chosen her own path. Those communications became part of a carefully constructed deception that delayed recognition of the truth. One of the most heartbreaking details that later emerged from the investigation involved the possibility that Annegret attempted to communicate distress through some of those messages. Investigators reportedly believed that certain letters contained subtle indicators suggesting coercion or danger. At the time, however, nobody recognized them. Hindsight often provides clarity that is unavailable in the moment. Families reading such correspondence naturally want to believe their loved one is safe. Small irregularities can be overlooked when weighed against the relief of receiving any message at all. The possibility that someone trapped in captivity attempted to leave clues that went unnoticed adds an additional layer of tragedy to the case. Yet unlike Hildegard and Annegret, there was one woman whose story did not end in disappearance. Her survival would ultimately become the turning point that exposed everything hidden beneath years of deception. That woman was Krista S. She was 53 years old when she crossed paths with Reinstrom in 1991. Significantly, she too had a connection to the same social circle that linked the offender to Hildegard. Krista was the new partner of Reinstrom's former vocational instructor. This detail would later attract considerable attention because it revealed a pattern within the offender's victim selection. Whether viewed through the lens of opportunity, familiarity, or personal fixation, the connection cannot be ignored. Krista's role in the story differs fundamentally from that of the other victims because she survived long enough to tell investigators what happened. Survival transformed her from a victim into a witness. It allowed authorities to hear firsthand descriptions of the bunker. It provided details that could be investigated. It supplied information that eventually prompted investigators to look beyond a single kidnapping case and consider the possibility of earlier crimes. In many criminal investigations, a single unexpected event changes everything. Sometimes it is a witness who comes forward. Sometimes it is a forensic discovery. Sometimes it is a mistake made by the offender. In this case, those elements would eventually converge. But before that happened, years passed during which the truth remained hidden. Looking back, what makes the background of this case so disturbing is not merely the existence of violence. Violent crimes, sadly, occur in many societies. What makes this case particularly haunting is the coexistence of two realities. On one level, there was ordinary life, a businessman operating a legitimate enterprise, interacting with customers, maintaining a household, and presenting himself as a normal member of the community. On another level, there was a hidden world of captivity, isolation, and suffering concealed beneath that ordinary existence. The victim stood at the center of that hidden world. Hildegard K., Annegret B., and Krista S. entered the story under different circumstances and at different moments in time. Yet their experiences would become interconnected through the actions of one man and one concealed location. As investigators would later discover, the bunker beneath Reinstrom's home was more than a physical structure. It was the setting in which years of deception were maintained. It was the place where victims were separated from their families. It was the place where false narratives were created. And it was the place that would eventually become one of the most important pieces of evidence in a case that shocked Germany. The crimes themselves, however, had not yet been uncovered. The disappearances remained unresolved. The families remained without answers. The offender remained hidden behind the appearance of normality. And as the years progressed, the situation would only become more dangerous. The next chapter of this story would reveal how the crimes unfolded, how the victims were trapped inside a secret underground prison, and how a pattern of manipulation, captivity, and violence developed over time until a single mistake set the stage for everything to collapse. By the time investigators eventually uncovered the truth about Lutz Reinstrom, they would come to understand that the crimes were not isolated acts committed in a moment of impulse. Instead, the evidence revealed a pattern that unfolded across several years. The victims were different. The circumstances varied. Yet certain elements appeared repeatedly: abduction, confinement inside the hidden bunker, manipulation through forced communications, financial exploitation, and ultimately violence. The first known victim was Hildegard K. On March 12, 1986, her life intersected with the hidden world that existed beneath Reinstrom's ordinary public image. At 61 years old, she was not a stranger to him. She was the wife of the former vocational instructor who had once played an important role in his life. That connection is one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. Criminal acts committed by strangers are frightening enough, but crimes involving familiarity often carry an additional layer of betrayal. According to the investigation, Reinstrom abducted Hildegard and brought her to the underground bunker hidden beneath his home. What happened after that would remain concealed for years. The bunker itself played a central role in the crime, hidden beneath the surface of an otherwise ordinary residence. It was a place designed to isolate its occupants from the outside world. Once inside, a victim could be separated from family, friends, neighbors, and anyone who might have been searching for them. For approximately 1 week, Hildegard was held captive there. The available records indicate that she was imprisoned and subjected to abuse during that period. While the precise details of every day of her captivity were never fully documented in public records, investigators concluded that she was entirely under Reinstrom's control. One of the most significant aspects of the crime involved money and valuables. According to the case evidence, Reinstrom obtained approximately 40,000 German marks in cash and jewelry from Hildegard. Financial gain clearly formed part of the motive behind the offense. Yet the case would eventually reveal that money alone did not explain what happened. If financial theft had been the sole objective, the crimes might have ended differently. Instead, the captivity continued. During her imprisonment, Hildegard was forced to participate in a deception designed to protect the offender. Reinstrom compelled her to write letters that would later be sent to family members. Those letters created a false narrative. They suggested that she had chosen to leave voluntarily. They implied that she was beginning a new chapter of her life. They discouraged efforts to search for her. To the people receiving those messages, the letters appeared to offer reassurance. While concerns may have existed, the correspondence created the impression that Hildegard remained alive and had acted of her own free will. In reality, investigators later concluded that the letters had been written under coercion. This manipulation became one of the most chilling elements of the case because it weaponized hope. Families searching for answers were unknowingly being guided toward the wrong conclusion. Every letter reinforced the illusion that no crime had occurred. Every message bought additional time for the offender. After approximately 1 week in captivity, Hildegard was murdered. The exact method of killing was not fully detailed in the available case material. What investigators did establish, however, was what happened afterward. Reinstrom dismembered her body and placed the remains into containers containing hydrochloric acid. The use of acid was intended to destroy evidence and make future identification more difficult. It was this method of disposal that would eventually contribute to the nickname that became associated with the case: the acid barrel killer. Yet despite the brutality of the crime, the truth remained hidden. The letters continued to influence perceptions of her disappearance, and the offender succeeded in concealing what had happened. For a time, the deception worked. More than 2 years later, the pattern repeated itself. On October 5, 1988, Reinstrom abducted a second victim, 31-year-old Annegret B. If the first crime demonstrated planning and manipulation, the second revealed an even more disturbing escalation. According to investigators, Annegret was taken to the same underground bunker and held there for a far longer period, whereas Hildegard had been imprisoned for roughly 1 week. Annegret remained captive for nearly 4 weeks. 4 weeks is a difficult period of time to fully comprehend in the context of captivity. It is not a matter of hours or days. It is nearly an entire month spent under the control of another person. During those weeks, the outside world continued moving forward. People went to work. Families followed their routines. Yet somewhere beneath a residential property, Annegret was being held against her will. According to the case records, Reinstrom repeatedly exploited her financially. He used her bank accounts and withdrew money while she remained captive. Investigators concluded that he deliberately prolonged the period of imprisonment in order to continue extracting financial benefit. The crime therefore combined elements of kidnapping, financial exploitation, and prolonged captivity. But the abuse extended beyond financial motives. Prosecutors later established that Annegret was subjected to repeated sexual abuse and torture during her confinement. The evidence uncovered during the investigation painted a deeply disturbing picture of systematic control. Unlike many offenders who seek to conceal every trace of their crimes, Reinstrom preserved records of what occurred. Investigators discovered photographs connected to the captivity. They found audio recordings. They recovered documentation linked to the victim. These materials would later become significant evidence because they demonstrated the extent of the offender's actions and his desire to document them. The existence of such records suggested that the crime was not merely about obtaining money. Instead, the evidence pointed toward a broader pattern of domination and control. As in the earlier case, deception played a central role. Annegret was forced to write letters and postcards that would be sent to her family. Those messages created the illusion that she had chosen to be away. The correspondence suggested normality. It implied independence. It concealed the reality of captivity. Family members receiving those communications had no immediate reason to assume that every word was being written under pressure. Years later, investigators revisited those letters and identified details that appeared unusual. Some believed that Annegret may have attempted to communicate distress through subtle signals hidden within the correspondence. Whether those clues were intentional warnings or simply indications of her circumstances, they were not recognized at the time. For those reading the messages, the possibility that she was imprisoned inside a secret bunker would have been almost unimaginable. Tragically, the deception succeeded. After nearly 4 weeks of captivity, Annegret was murdered. As with the first victim, investigators determined that her body was dismembered. The remains were placed into metal containers and exposed to acid in an effort to destroy evidence. The containers were subsequently concealed. Once again, the offenders succeeded in delaying discovery. Years passed. The crimes remained hidden. Families continued living with uncertainty. The offender continued presenting himself to the world as an ordinary businessman. Had events ended there, the truth might have remained buried indefinitely. But in 1991, a third victim entered the story, and this time circumstances unfolded differently. On September 6, 1991, 53-year-old Krista S. was abducted by Reinstrom. Like the earlier victims, she was connected to the same social circle surrounding his former vocational instructor. According to the investigation, Reinstrom used a stun gun to overpower her before taking her to the bunker. Once inside the underground chamber, the familiar pattern resumed. Krista was restrained and held captive. Yet her experience included an additional element that would later become important. During her imprisonment, Reinstrom showed her photographs associated with previous victims and materials connected to earlier crimes. Investigators would later view this behavior as a significant indication of his mindset. For Krista, however, the immediate impact was fear. The images demonstrated the danger she faced. They suggested that other women had entered the bunker before her. They implied outcomes she desperately hoped to avoid. Reinstrom demanded a ransom of 300,000 German marks. Once again, financial motives appeared alongside the broader pattern of control. At this stage, there was every reason to believe that Krista's fate might mirror that of the previous victims. She had been abducted. She had been imprisoned. She was isolated from the outside world. The offender remained in control. Yet despite years of planning and apparent confidence, Reinstrom made a mistake. According to the investigation, his wife unexpectedly returned home earlier than anticipated. The sudden change created a problem he had not planned for. The continued presence of a captive woman inside the bunker now carried a heightened risk of discovery. Investigators later concluded that this unexpected development disrupted his plans. Faced with the possibility that the hidden bunker could be exposed, Reinstrom chose a course of action unlike the one taken with the previous victims. Rather than continuing the captivity, he released Krista. On September 13, 1991, he took her near a police station and set her free. At the time, he may have believed that he was solving an immediate problem. In reality, he was creating a far greater one. For the first time, a victim emerged from the bunker alive. For the first time, someone could describe what existed beneath the house. For the first time, investigators gained direct insight into the methods of the offender. Everything that followed, the investigation, the searches, the discovery of human remains, the trial, and the eventual conviction would trace back to that single decision. The crimes that had remained hidden for years were about to face scrutiny. The secret world beneath the house was about to be exposed. And the carefully maintained illusion that had protected Lutz Reinstrom for so long was beginning to collapse. Many criminal investigations begin with a crime scene. Others begin with a body. The investigation that ultimately exposed Lutz Reinstrom began with something far less definitive, but ultimately far more important: a surviving victim. For years, the disappearances of Hildegard K. and Annegret B. had remained unresolved. Both women had vanished under circumstances clouded by uncertainty. Both had left behind communications suggesting they had chosen to leave voluntarily. Both cases lacked the clear evidence that often drives a homicide investigation forward. As a result, the truth remained hidden. That situation changed in September 1991 when Krista S. emerged alive from the bunker beneath Renstrom's home. Her survival transformed what might have remained a hidden crime into an active investigation. Yet even then, authorities did not immediately understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. At first, the case appeared to involve kidnapping and extortion. Those offenses alone were serious. A woman had been abducted, held against her will, and subjected to a ransom demand of 300,000 German marks. Investigators had every reason to focus their attention on those crimes. Had they limited their efforts to the immediate circumstances of Krista's captivity, the investigation might have ended there. But certain details refused to fit neatly into a simple kidnapping case. As investigators interviewed Krista and examined the available evidence, questions began to emerge. One of the most important aspects of her account involved the bunker itself. The underground chamber she described did not resemble a temporary hiding place or an improvised location chosen in haste. According to the evidence later examined by authorities, the bunker appeared carefully prepared and specifically adapted for confinement. The reinforced steel door, the sound-insulated detention area, the locking systems, and the equipment associated with restraint and documentation suggested planning. Such preparations implied experience. They suggested that the person responsible had devoted considerable effort to creating an environment designed for captivity. Investigators began asking a simple but powerful question. Why would someone build such a place for a single kidnapping? The more they examined the circumstances, the more difficult it became to accept that Krista was the first victim ever brought into the bunker. Another element of Krista's testimony added to those suspicions. During her captivity, Renstrom had shown her photographs and materials connected to previous victims. To Krista, those images had served as instruments of intimidation. To investigators, however, they represented something else entirely. They hinted at a history that extended beyond the crime currently under investigation. If those photographs were what authorities suspected they were, then the kidnapping of Krista might not be an isolated event. It might instead represent the latest chapter in a much longer pattern of criminal behavior. Cases often turn on moments when investigators choose to look beyond the obvious explanation. In this instance, a female investigator reportedly became particularly important. While the available records do not provide extensive personal details about her, they do indicate that she played a significant role in recognizing connections others might have overlooked. Rather than viewing the case solely through the lens of the recent kidnapping, she considered the possibility that earlier disappearances might be related. This was not an easy conclusion to reach. Criminal investigations depend on evidence, not intuition. Suspicion alone cannot justify accusations. Yet experienced investigators understand that patterns matter. Similar methods matter. Similar victim profiles matter. The existence of a sophisticated underground detention facility mattered. Gradually, attention shifted beyond the immediate facts surrounding Krista's abduction. Authorities began examining whether unsolved disappearances might share characteristics with the current case. As the investigation expanded, the possibility that Renstrom had victimized others became increasingly difficult to ignore. The inquiry grew larger. More records were reviewed. More connections were explored. More questions were asked. Throughout criminal history, some offenders are ultimately exposed because of advanced forensic science. Others are identified through eyewitness testimony or confessions. In the Renstrom case, persistence played a critical role. The willingness of investigators to continue asking questions prevented the case from ending with a single kidnapping charge. Instead, authorities pursued the possibility that a much darker truth remained hidden. Their efforts eventually led to searches of properties associated with Reinstrom. These searches would become the defining turning point of the entire investigation. Until that moment, suspicions existed, questions existed, theories existed, but investigators still needed physical evidence capable of proving what had happened to the missing women. In 1992, that evidence began to emerge. Authorities searched locations connected to Reinstrom, including property in Basedow. There, investigators made a discovery that fundamentally altered the case. Buried on the property was a metal container holding human remains. The significance of the discovery was immediate. What had previously been an investigation centered on kidnapping and extortion was now connected to human remains hidden in a concealed location. The discovery provided tangible evidence that demanded further examination. Yet the investigation was not finished. Additional searches continued. Eventually, another container associated with the crimes was located in Hamburg. This second discovery reinforced investigators' growing belief that they had uncovered evidence connected to multiple victims. The details were horrifying. Human remains had been concealed within metal barrels and exposed to hydrochloric acid in an apparent effort to destroy evidence and hinder identification. The very method that had helped conceal the crimes for years would ultimately contribute to exposing them. The barrels became one of the most recognizable aspects of the case. They transformed public understanding of the investigation and gave rise to the nickname that newspapers would later use when describing Reinstrom: the acid barrel killer. For investigators and forensic specialists, however, the barrels represented something more important than headlines. They represented victims. They represented people who had vanished years earlier. And they represented an opportunity to finally provide answers that families have been denied for so long. The forensic process that followed was painstaking. The effects of acid on human remains complicated identification efforts. Specialists were required to examine recovered material carefully and methodically. Their work was not dramatic. It did not unfold in a single breakthrough moment. Instead, it consisted of detailed analysis designed to establish who the victims were and how the evidence connected to the broader investigation. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. The discoveries supported the theory that investigators had developed following Krista's testimony. The disappearances of Hildegard K. and Annegret B. were no longer isolated mysteries viewed independently from one another. The emerging evidence linked them to a single offender, a single location, and a single pattern of criminal conduct. The significance of that realization cannot be overstated. For years, uncertainty had dominated the narrative. Families had received letters suggesting voluntary departures. Questions had remained unanswered. There had been no clear explanation for what had happened. Now, investigators were uncovering evidence that challenged the entire false narrative. The letters that once implied freedom now appeared in a different light. Rather than evidence of voluntary choices, they became evidence of manipulation and coercion. Rather than explaining the disappearances, they helped explain how the disappearances had remained concealed. The investigation also revealed the extent to which Reinstrom had attempted to preserve control over the stories surrounding his victims. The forced correspondence, the financial exploitation, the confinement inside the bunker, and the concealment of remains all served a common purpose. Each element delayed discovery. Each element bought time. Each element contributed to the illusion that nothing criminal had occurred. Yet despite years of concealment, the system ultimately failed because of one factor Reinstrom could not fully control: a surviving witness. Krista S. had escaped the fate that befell the earlier victims. She was able to speak. She was able to describe the bunker. She was able to provide investigators with information that transformed suspicion into inquiry and inquiry into evidence. Looking back, the investigation unfolded as a chain of interconnected events. Krista's survival led to testimony. Testimony led to suspicion. Suspicion led to expanded inquiries. Expanded inquiries led to property searches. Property searches led to the discovery of human remains. Those discoveries transformed the case from one involving kidnapping and extortion into one involving murder. By the time the investigation reached its later stages, the hidden world beneath Reinstrom's ordinary public life had begun to collapse. The bunker that once provided secrecy had become evidence. The barrels that once concealed victims had been recovered. The letters that once misled families had been reinterpreted in light of the truth. And investigators now possessed the foundation necessary to bring the case into a courtroom. What remained was the legal battle ahead. Reinstrom would deny responsibility for murder. He would offer alternative explanations. He would attempt to challenge the conclusions investigators had reached. But the investigation had already uncovered a body of evidence that would prove difficult to dismiss. The next phase of the case would unfold before judges, lawyers, and the public, as years of hidden crimes were finally subjected to scrutiny in court. By the time the proceedings against Lutz Reinstrom reached the courtroom in 1995, the case had already taken on a weight far beyond its initial charges. What began as an investigation into kidnapping and extortion had evolved into something much larger, shaped by the discovery of human remains, the testimony of a surviving victim, and the reconstruction of crimes that had remained hidden for years beneath an ordinary residential property in Hamburg. The courtroom now stood as the place where those hidden events would be formally examined, tested, and judged under the framework of law. At the center of the proceedings was a man who, until recently, had lived in the public eye as a seemingly ordinary businessman. Lutz Reinstrom entered the courtroom not as a figure already fully defined by legal certainty, but as a defendant who still maintained his own version of events. Despite the weight of the evidence collected during the investigation, he did not admit to murder. Instead, he denied responsibility for the killings attributed to him. His defense strategy relied on alternative explanations that attempted to reframe the deaths and the surrounding circumstances in ways that distanced him from direct culpability. Among the arguments presented were claims suggesting that the victims may have died as a result of accidents. At other points, he referenced speculative scenarios involving organized criminal activity, including theories about a mafia engaged in illegal organ trade. These explanations, however, stood in stark contrast to the evidence that investigators had painstakingly gathered over several years. The prosecution's case was built not on a single piece of evidence, but on a convergence of multiple sources. The testimony of Krista S. provided a direct account of captivity inside the underground bunker. Her description of the environment aligned with the physical structure later examined by investigators, including features designed for confinement and control. Her survival offered a rare and crucial perspective that connected the abstract findings of the investigation to lived experience. Alongside her testimony, the court considered the forensic evidence recovered during the searches conducted in 1992. The discovery of metal containers containing human remains was central to the proceedings. These remains, altered by exposure to hydrochloric acid, represented victims whose identities and fates had previously been obscured. Although the chemical process complicated identification, the existence of the remains themselves established an undeniable fact. The disappearance cases were not voluntary absences, but incidents involving death and concealment. The prosecution also introduced evidence related to the underground bunker. Its structure and design suggested deliberate preparation. The presence of reinforced access points, sound insulation, and equipment associated with restraint and recording indicated that the space had been adapted for purposes beyond ordinary residential use. This physical environment formed a crucial part of the prosecution's argument, as it demonstrated that the conditions in which the victims were held were not accidental or improvised. In addition, the court examined the forced correspondence attributed to the victims. Letters and postcards that had been sent to families during the period of disappearance were presented as part of the deception used to mask the crimes. These documents had originally created the impression that the women had left voluntarily. However, in the context of the broader evidence, they were interpreted as instruments of coercion. Rather than providing clarity at the time they were received, they had contributed to prolonging uncertainty and delaying investigation. Audio recordings and photographic material recovered during the investigation further reinforced the prosecution's case. These items, linked to the period of captivity, illustrated the extent to which the victims had been monitored and documented. Their existence supported the conclusion that the crimes were not isolated acts of violence, but part of a sustained pattern of control over the victims while they were held inside the bunker. As the trial progressed, the contrast between the prosecution's evidence and the defendant's explanations became increasingly pronounced. The defense attempted to challenge the interpretation of events, but the accumulation of physical evidence, witness testimony, and investigative findings formed a coherent narrative that proved difficult to dismantle. Each element reinforced the others. The testimony of Christe S. aligned with the physical layout of the bunker. The discovery of remains corresponded with the timeline of disappearances. The forced letters matched the periods in which victims were believed to have been in captivity. Together, these elements created a unified account that the court was required to evaluate. Throughout the proceedings, the emotional weight of the case remained present, even when not explicitly stated in legal language. Behind every piece of evidence was a human life interrupted. Behind every document was a family that had spent years without answers. Behind every forensic report was a story of suffering that could not be fully reconstructed in a courtroom setting. Yet the legal process required structure and restraint. The court's responsibility was not to speculate beyond the evidence, but to assess what could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. On May 22, 1996, after extensive hearings and examination of the evidence, the court delivered its verdict. Lutz Reinstrom was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. The court also determined that his guilt was of particular severity, a designation that reflected the seriousness of the crimes and carried significant implications for parole eligibility. In addition to life imprisonment, the court imposed preventive detention measures to ensure continued confinement after the completion of the primary sentence, if necessary. The verdict represented the formal conclusion of a long investigative and judicial process. It transformed years of uncertainty into legal resolution. However, it did not erase the questions that had surrounded the case from the beginning. During and after the trial, the defendant's refusal to acknowledge responsibility for the murders remained a defining aspect of his position. His alternative explanations were ultimately rejected by the court, but they formed part of the broader narrative that unfolded during the proceedings. The judgment of the court rested not on speculation, but on the combined strength of physical evidence, forensic findings, and witness testimony. In the end, the legal system concluded that the crimes had been proven to the required standard. With the sentencing complete, the courtroom phase of the case came to an end. Yet, while the trial concluded in a legal sense, the broader impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom walls. The next stage of the story would shift focus away from legal arguments and toward the wider consequences of the crimes, both for society and for those directly affected by them. The verdict marked closure in one sense. but it also reinforced the enduring questions that continue to surround the case to this day. The conviction of Lutz Reinstrom in 1996 formally closed one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in post-war Germany. But it did not close the emotional or psychological space the case had opened in public consciousness. Long after the courtroom fell silent, the story continued to resonate because it confronted society with an unsettling contradiction. How a man who appeared outwardly ordinary could maintain, for years, a hidden system of captivity and violence beneath his own home without immediate detection. The case left behind not only legal conclusions, but also enduring questions about perception, trust, and the limits of what can be seen from the outside. One of the central reasons the case remained so deeply embedded in public memory was the dual existence of Lutz Reinstrom's life. To neighbors, customers, and acquaintances, he had been a functioning member of society. He operated a fur business, maintained family life, and was described as polite and socially unremarkable. This external normality stood in stark contrast to what investigators uncovered beneath his property in Hamburg, a concealed underground bunker adapted for confinement, control, and prolonged detention. The psychological dissonance between these two realities became one of the defining features of the case. It forced a reconsideration of assumptions about how dangerous individuals are recognized in everyday life. The victims at the center of the case, Hildegard K., Annegret B., and Christa S. each represented a different outcome within the same hidden system. Hildegard K. and Annegret B. disappeared into the bunker and never returned. Their fates concealed for years through forced communications and physical concealment of remains. Christa S., however, survived, and her survival became the pivotal event that allowed investigators to reconstruct the broader pattern of crimes. Without her testimony, the hidden structure beneath Reinstrom's home might never have been discovered, and the earlier disappearances might have remained unresolved. This aspect of the case has often been regarded by investigators as one of its most critical turning points. The investigation that followed Christa's release revealed a systematic pattern rather than isolated incidents. The use of an underground detention space, the coercion of victims into writing misleading letters, the financial exploitation through forced access to bank accounts, and the eventual concealment of bodies in metal containers treated with hydrochloric acid all formed part of a consistent operational method. Each component of the system served to delay detection and obscure responsibility. The use of correspondence, in particular, played a significant psychological role. To families, the letters appeared to indicate voluntary absence. In reality, they functioned as instruments of control, extending the period during which the victim's true conditions remained hidden. The discovery of physical remains in metal containers marked a turning point not only in the investigation, but also in public understanding of the case. The presence of hydrochloric acid had severely affected the condition of the remains, complicating identification efforts and demonstrating the extent to which concealment had been prioritized. These findings shifted the case definitively from missing persons inquiries into confirmed homicide investigations. It was no longer a question of where the women had gone, but of how their deaths had been concealed for so long. The trial that followed brought these elements into a formal legal framework, but it also highlighted the limitations of courtroom processes in fully capturing the human dimension of the crimes. While evidence could be presented, analyzed, and weighed, the lived experience of the victims during their captivity remained largely beyond reconstruction. The bunker, as described through testimony and forensic examination, stood as a physical representation of isolation. It was a space removed from public view, sound-insulated and secured, where victims were cut off from external contact. Yet even this description could only partially convey the reality of prolonged confinement. After sentencing, the case continued to generate discussion among investigators and observers. One of the recurring questions concerned whether Reinstrom might have been responsible for additional crimes that were never discovered or proven. This line of inquiry reflected the difficulty of reconciling the known scope of his actions with the possibility that other disappearances might share similar characteristics. However, despite speculation, no additional charges were ever substantiated with sufficient evidence to extend the legal findings beyond the established victims. The absence of further convictions did not eliminate uncertainty, but it reinforced the boundaries of what could be legally confirmed. From a broader societal perspective, the case became a reference point in discussions about hidden violence and the limitations of external perception. It demonstrated that criminal behavior of extreme severity can exist in proximity to ordinary life, without immediate visibility. It also illustrated how coercion and manipulation can extend the duration of crimes by distorting communication between victims and their families. The letters sent during captivity, once interpreted as signs of voluntary disappearance, became a central example of how appearance can be weaponized to delay discovery. In the years following the conviction, the case of Lutz Reinstrom remained part of the historical record of German criminal investigations, frequently cited in discussions of abduction, clandestine detention, and forensic discovery of concealed remains. The nickname Acid Barrel Killer persisted in public discourse, summarizing in a single phrase the method of concealment that had shocked investigators and the public alike. Yet beyond the label, the case continued to carry a deeper significance rooted in its structure. A hidden space, prolonged captivity, and a gradual unraveling triggered by a single survivor. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of the case is not the violence itself, but the sequence by which it was ultimately revealed. It was not solved through a single breakthrough, but through a chain of events that began with survival. Christa SS' release created the possibility of testimony. That testimony led to investigation. Investigation led to discovery. Discovery led to legal accountability. Each step depended on the one before it, forming a sequence in which one act of survival altered the outcome of multiple hidden crimes. Even after decades, the case continues to be examined not only for what it reveals about one individual offender, but also for what it suggests about systems of concealment and detection. It raises enduring questions about how long hidden crimes can remain undetected, how trust can be manipulated through fabricated communication, and how many truths can exist beneath a single ordinary exterior. In the end, the case of Lutz Reinstrom does not conclude with the conviction alone. It concludes with the recognition that beneath visible reality, other realities can exist unseen for years, waiting for a moment of disruption to bring them to light. The bunker has long since been exposed, the legal process completed, and the offender confined. Yet the story remains a reminder that some of the most disturbing histories are not defined only by what happened, but by how long it remained hidden before anyone could see it. Even after the trial concluded and the sentence was handed down, the case of Lutz Reinstrom continued to occupy a difficult space between legal resolution and unresolved human impact. The justice system had delivered its verdict, life imprisonment, recognition of particularly severe guilt, and preventive detention measures. From a legal standpoint, the matter was closed. Yet from the perspective of the broader public, investigators, and the families of the victims, the story remained emotionally open-ended in ways that no courtroom decision could fully resolve. At the center of this enduring unease was the nature of how the crimes had been concealed. The existence of the underground bunker beneath an ordinary residential property in Hamburg Forst A. Fundamental confrontation with the idea of visibility. Nothing about the exterior of the building suggested what lay beneath it. The facade of normal life, business activity, social interaction, and family presence coexisted with a hidden environment designed for isolation and control. This dual structure became one of the most discussed elements of the case because it challenged assumptions about how danger is recognized in everyday environments. The victims, Hildegard K. and Annegret B., were ultimately remembered not only for how they were killed, but also for how long their disappearances remained obscured. Their forced letters created a layer of misinformation that delayed investigation and shaped the perception of their families for extended periods. These communications, later understood as products of coercion, illustrate how written words can become tools of deception when removed from their true context. What appeared to be voluntary absence was, in reality, a carefully maintained illusion. The psychological weight of this deception is part of what continues to define the case. Families were not only deprived of loved ones, they were also misled into believing those loved ones had made independent choices to disappear. This prolonged uncertainty is often described by investigators and observers as one of the most painful aspects of missing person cases that involve deliberate concealment. In the case of Annegret B., the situation was further complicated by the later discovery that some of her communications may have contained subtle indications of distress. Whether intentional or not, these signals were not recognized at the time, and their meaning only emerged in hindsight. This aspect of the case underscores a recurring challenge in investigations involving captivity: the difficulty of distinguishing between genuine communication and messages shaped by coercion. The physical evidence discovered during the investigation, particularly the metal containers and the remains treated with hydrochloric acid, shifted the case from uncertainty into confirmed criminality. Yet even this transition did not fully resolve the broader questions raised by the investigation. The use of acid as a method of concealment demonstrated a deliberate effort to prevent identification and delay discovery. But it also complicated forensic analysis, leaving gaps in the physical record that could never be completely filled. These gaps contributed to the lingering questions that persisted even after sentencing. The survival of Krista S. remains one of the most significant elements in understanding the cases. Resolution. Her escape did not simply end a single kidnapping. It triggered the collapse of a hidden system that had operated for years. Without her testimony, the bunker might never have been discovered, and the earlier crimes might have remained concealed indefinitely. Her account provided the initial framework that allowed investigators to reinterpret previous disappearances and re-examine them under a unified theory of events. In many criminal investigations, the role of a surviving victim becomes a critical bridge between unknown events and documented truth. In this case, that role was decisive. Despite the strength of the evidence presented in court, the defendant's refusal to fully acknowledge responsibility for the murders contributed to ongoing public discussion about the case. His alternative explanations, ranging from accident theories to speculative claims involving organized crime, were ultimately rejected by the court, but they remained part of the narrative record. This tension between judicial conclusion and personal denial is not uncommon in high-profile criminal cases. But here it added another layer of complexity to an already disturbing set of facts. Another enduring aspect of the case is the question of scope. Investigators considered whether additional victims might have been involved, given the nature of the crimes, the level of preparation evident in the bunker, and the methods used for concealment. However, despite these considerations, no further charges were supported by sufficient evidence. As a result, the legal findings remained limited to the established victims. This boundary between possibility and proof is a recurring feature in complex criminal investigations. particularly those involving long-term concealment. From a societal perspective, the case is often referenced in discussions about how ordinary environments can conceal extraordinary crimes. It challenges the assumption that extreme violence is always visible or immediately detectable. Instead, it demonstrates that prolonged concealment can exist alongside normal social functioning, at least for a period of time. The existence of the bunker beneath a residential home remains one of the most striking illustrations of this reality. The case also continues to be studied in relation to investigative methodology. The initial focus on a single kidnapping case might have concluded without uncovering the broader pattern of crimes. It was the persistence of investigators, combined with the analysis of inconsistencies in victim communications and the careful examination of environmental evidence, that expanded the scope of the investigation. This progression highlights the importance of treating anomalies in a case not as isolated irregularities, but as potential indicators of a larger structure. In the broader historical context of German criminal investigations, the case of Lutz Reinstrom remains significant not only because of its brutality, but because of its structure. It involved prolonged captivity, psychological manipulation through fabricated correspondence, financial exploitation, and physical concealment of remains in chemically treated containers. Each of these elements contributed to a system designed to delay discovery and obscure accountability. Yet despite this system, it ultimately failed due to the survival of a single victim and the investigative decisions that followed. Today, the case is often remembered through its most striking elements: the hidden bunker, the forced letters, the metal barrels, and the nickname that emerged in the press. But beneath those elements lies a more complex reality shaped by timing, chance, and investigation. Had Krista S. not been released when she was, the sequence of events that followed might never have occurred. The bunker might have remained undiscovered for much longer. The earlier victims might have remained missing persons without resolution. The truth, in that sense, was not uncovered all at once, but gradually, through a chain of developments that began with a single moment of escape. Ultimately, the case leaves behind a set of enduring reflections rather than simple conclusions. It reflects on how appearances can mask reality, how communication can be manipulated to distort truth, and how fragile the boundary can be between what is known and what remains hidden. It also serves as a reminder that even in cases where legal resolution is achieved, the emotional and psychological impact extends far beyond the courtroom. The story of Lutz Reinstrom is therefore not only a record of criminal acts and judicial outcomes. It is also a record of how hidden systems of control can exist within ordinary spaces, and how their exposure depends on the convergence of survival, investigation, and persistence. In the end, what remains is not only the memory of the crimes, but also the recognition that their discovery was neither immediate nor inevitable. It was the result of a fragile chain of events that, once broken open, revealed a reality that had been concealed for years beneath the surface of everyday life.